Let's now take a look at the British Empire and the way it interfaces with Enlightenment. Firstly, we need to get our head around Britain has two imperial ages, and the age we're concerned with is their second empire, the Empire of New Imperialism, that exists after the American Revolution of 1775. Largely we're talking about the British Empire that exists during the 19th century, the 1800s. It's a period in which Britain rules the waves. It is a large empire built upon naval power. It's built upon a closed system of economic trade within the empire and huge territorial conquests of India, Africa and Australasia. And so the shape of the empire in 1919 is that red shade that you're seeing now on the screen in front of you. Notice this strip of land in which Britain had a dream of building a railway from Cape Town to Cairo completely through British land, and this is dreamed very much of Cecil Rhodes. And when we talk about Rhodes, this area here is what he referred to as Rhodesia, what is now Zimbabwe. British public opinion really considered the British Empire to be some sort of God-given reward for their technological superiority during the Industrial Revolution, which was a product of the Scientific Revolution, if you like, scientific and technical enlightenment, and for its moral superiority as a nation. Now, that concept of moral superiority, somehow they were given the gift of learning that came out of the Enlightenment, somehow connects with some conceptualization of race. And Cecil Rhodes picks up upon this idea. Many of the British, like Rhodes, considered they were doing the work of history, that they were a civilizing force. They were progressing history by taking the Christian British form of government to the rest of the world. They would end slavery, as they did throughout the empire in the early 1800s, act as a world policeman to ensure the law will triumph within its empire, and that they would end any of the barbaric traditions and bring civilization to the world. And we can see that very much in this quote by Rhodes, that white English were the first race of the world, and the prime race, the highest race of the world, and that the more of the world they occupied, the better they would be for humanity. That somehow large parts of the world were populated by what they considered despicable, what Rhodes considered despicable specimens, if you like, less evolved almost, members of human race. And that if they could only be brought into the sphere of British dominance, that they would progress as a people. So it's this sense of civilizing mission sitting alongside the sitting alongside Enlightenment that is dominating the thinking of many people within the British Empire. We can see that show up in some of the sources of the time. We're going to look at an 1890 and 1894 source from Punch. Okay, having a look at this one, we see Britannia acting as a civilizing force, rejecting the shadowy caste system of India, protecting the coloured-skinned women of India from inequality. So we've got this interesting paternalistic mix of Enlightenment values of equality with civilizing mission values of imperialism. Looking at this source, we've got John Bull, another representation of Britain, saying, what, another? I suppose we must take it in, talking about an African nation, the area of Uganda, being childlike, needing to be brought into the empire, somehow to be protected, to be civilized. The Enlightenment values of Western European nations such as Britain being imposed on those not yet civilized enough to have embraced the Enlightenment. This is this sense of imperialism and racism mixing with Enlightenment within the British Empire in the 1800s. The 1800s in Africa is very much a time of warfare as Britain expands its empire. We see British expeditions to crush uprisings, such as the one in the Mahdist Wars of the 1880s, where General Gordon, pictured here in a statue mounted on a camel, was killed at Khartoum by Mahdist rebels, and the British Empire sent troops, including some from Queensland, to crush this uprising. The role of the mother country within this paternalistic empire was one in which it would guide and cultivate civilization in its colonies. The role of the colonies, on the other hand, was kind of twofold, and it needs to be seen through a racial lens. Firstly, the colonies of the British Empire were to serve Britain in a time of war. If a predominantly British Empire colony was white, it would serve by sending its soldiers as cubs of the lion, as this 1914 cartoon shows. The mother lion, the British lion, would roar, and the white colonies would come to support her. This cartoon's interesting because we can see India standing to the side as the jewel of the crown of the empire. Predominantly the white nations would send soldiers to fight in colonial wars, while the non-white nations, such as India, were required to send resources and materials. So in many of the artworks, many of the imagery, we see images of soldiers from the colonies, such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, sending their troops, while India's role is relegated, even though it is a huge colony, relegated to sending resources and materials. In both times of peace and war, the colonies were part of a closed economic system in which trade was very much set up to support the mother country. Raw materials, marketplaces were provided by the colonies of the empire. In return for being an economic support system for the mother country, Britain would provide its governance, its security to those colonies. So we have the Enlightenment values of liberty, equality, rule of law, property being provided by the mother country for the empire, whether the local customs, indigenous peoples and so on of those colonies were accepting of those values or not. There was a sense that the white mother country knew what was best for the children, the cubs, the colonials. And those relationships of subservience and paternalism were underpinned to some extent by race.